Derrick Hale had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking the city, a fleet of luxury cars, and a business empire worth over $50 million. But when a 6-year-old girl with tear-stained cheeks whispered 4 words that would shatter his perfectly controlled world, he realized that all his wealth meant nothing compared to what he had unknowingly lost. The little girl's confession would force him to confront a past he thought he had buried forever, and discover a truth that would change 3 lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The October evening air carried the scent of autumn leaves and expensive perfume as Derrick Hale stepped out of his black Mercedes onto the pristine cobblestone driveway of the Grandview Hotel. The annual Children's Foundation Gala was in full swing, and the sounds of classical music and refined laughter drifted through the ornate glass doors. At 34, Derrick had built Hale Industries from a small tech startup into one of the most successful software companies on the West Coast, and tonight's event was just another obligation on his carefully managed social calendar. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks and straightened his custom-tailored tuxedo, his mind already calculating how long he needed to stay to make the appropriate impression. 45 minutes of networking, a brief speech about corporate responsibility, write a check for $50,000, and he could return to his penthouse to review the quarterly reports that awaited his bon. Attention! Derrick lived his life like a precisely orchestrated business plan. Every moment accounted for, every interaction serving a purpose. As he approached the hotel's grand entrance, something unusual caught his peripheral vision. A small figure sat huddled against the marble pillar beside the main doors, partially hidden in the shadows cast by the ornate lighting fixtures. It was a little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, wearing a wrinkled blue dress that looked like she had been playing in it all day. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves around her face, and even from a distance, Derrick could see the telltale shimmer of tears on her cheeks. The sight irritated him more than it concerned him. This was supposed to be an exclusive event, with security measures in place to ensure that only invited guests and their families were present. How had a random child managed to slip past the hotel's usually impeccable standards? Derrick's jaw tightened as he considered the implications for the event's reputation, and by extension, his own company's image as a major sponsor. He pulled out his phone and was about to call hotel security when he noticed other guests walking past the crying child without so much as a glance. Well-dressed men and women in expensive evening wear continued their conversations and laughter as if the little girl were invisible, their diamond jewelry catching the light as they swept through the entrance in clouds of designer fragrances and self-importance. Derrick paused, his finger hovering over his phone's screen. If no one else was concerned about the situation, perhaps it was better to simply let hotel staff handle it through normal channels. He had learned long ago that getting personally involved in other people's problems was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every minute spent on distractions was a minute stolen from building his empire, and he hadn't reached his current level of success by allowing emotions to cloud his judgment. The little girl's sobs grew louder, a heartbreaking sound that seemed to echo off the hotel's marble facade. She had drawn her knees up to her chest and buried her face in her arms, her small body shaking with each ragged breath. Derrick felt an unexpected thud of something unfamiliar in his chest, a sensation he quickly dismissed as misplaced sentimentality. He had no experience with children, no patience for their unpredictable emotions and constant needs. Deciding that the most efficient course of action was to simply ignore the situation, Derrick slipped his phone back into his jacket pocket and began walking toward the entrance. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the cobblestones as he increased his pace, eager to put the uncomfortable scene behind him and focus on the evening's business objectives. But as he drew closer to the entrance, the little girl looked up from her tears. Her face was flushed and streaked with mascara that must have belonged to an adult, suggesting she had been trying to clean herself up before giving in to her distress. Her eyes were large and dark, framed by impossibly long lashes that were now clumped together with moisture. There was something achingly vulnerable about her expression, a mixture of hope and desperation that made Derrick's steps falter despite his determination to remain uninvolved. "Excuse me," she called out in a small, trembling voice. "Excuse me, mister." Derrick pretended not to hear her, keeping his gaze fixed straight ahead as he approached the hotel's revolving doors. The doorman, resplendent in his gold-braided uniform, stepped forward to welcome him with the practiced smile reserved for the establishment's most valued patrons. "Good evening, Mr. Hale," the doorman said with a respectful nod. "The committee is looking forward to your remarks tonight." "Thank you, Robert," Derrick replied, his voice carrying the cool professionalism that had become his trademark in business dealings. "I trust everything is proceeding smoothly." "Indeed, sir. The silent auction has already raised over $200,000, and dinner service will begin shortly." As they spoke, Derrick became aware that the little girl had risen from her spot by the pillar and was now standing directly in his path. Her dress was more wrinkled than he had initially noticed, and there was a small grass stain on the skirt that suggested she had been outside for some time. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit in one hand, its gray fur matted, and one ear hanging by a few loose threads. "Please," she said, looking up at him with those impossibly large eyes. "I can't find my mommy." The words hit Derrick like a physical blow, though he couldn't quite understand why. He had heard similar pleas from lost children in shopping malls and airports countless times over the years, and they had never affected him beyond a mild annoyance at the disruption to his schedule. But something about this particular child, perhaps the way she held herself with a dignity that seemed far beyond her years, made it impossible for him to simply walk away. He glanced around, hoping to spot an adult who might be responsible for the girl, but saw only the usual collection of wealthy philanthropists and social climbers making their way into the gala. None of them seemed to be missing a child, and none showed any signs of concern about the little girl's obvious distress. "Where did you last see your mother?" Derrick found himself asking, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. The little girl's face brightened slightly at his attention, though fresh tears continued to spill down her cheeks. "She was talking to the pretty lady with the sparkly dress inside," she said, pointing toward the hotel's interior. "But then I had to go to the bathroom, and when I came back, I couldn't find her anywhere. I looked and looked, but there are so many people, and they're all so tall." Derrick felt his chest tighten unexpectedly. The image of this small child wandering through crowds of adults, searching desperately for her mother, stirred something protective within him that he had never experienced before. He tried to push the feeling aside, reminding himself that getting involved would only complicate his evening and potentially create more problems than it solved. "I'm sure hotel security can help you find her," he said, already reaching for his phone again. "Let me call someone who can." "Please don't leave me," the little girl interrupted, her voice breaking on the last word. "Everyone keeps walking away. I promise I'll be good. I just want my mommy." The desperation in her plea made Derrick's hand freeze on his phone. He looked down at her tear-stained face and felt something crack inside his carefully constructed emotional armor. Despite all his success and wealth, despite the respect he commanded in boardrooms across the country, he was powerless against the simple plea of a frightened child. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself by kneeling down to her eye level. "Elena," she whispered, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. "Elena Wu." "Elena," Derrick repeated, testing the name on his tongue. There was something familiar about it, though he couldn't place why it seemed to resonate in his memory. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Derrick." Elena's eyes widened slightly, and she studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Children, he had always believed, saw the world in simple terms of black and white, good and bad, safe and dangerous. But Elena's gaze held a complexity that seemed far beyond her years, as if she were searching for something specific in his features. "You have kind eyes," she said finally, her voice so soft he had to lean closer to hear her. Like in the picture. What picture? Derrick asked, though he wasn't sure why the question mattered. Elena's lower lip began to tremble again, and she pressed her face against her stuffed rabbit's worn fur. "Mommy has a picture," she whispered. "She looks at it sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping, and she cries. The man in the picture has eyes like yours." A chill ran down Derrick's spine, though he told himself it was merely the cool evening air. Thousands of men probably had eyes similar to his, and it was nothing more than coincidence that this lost child would make such an observation. He had learned long ago not to read meaning into random events, not to allow superstition or sentiment to cloud his rational thinking. But as he looked into Elena's face, he felt a strange recognition tugging at the edges of his consciousness. There was something about the shape of her eyes, the way her dark hair caught the light, even the stubborn set of her small chin that seemed hauntingly familiar. He found himself studying her features more intently, searching for what? He didn't even know what he was looking for. "Elena," he said carefully, "what's your mother's name?" "Leah," Elena replied without hesitation. "Elena Wu. She's the most beautiful mommy in the whole world, and she makes the best pancakes, and she reads me stories every night before bed. She says she loves me more than all the stars in the sky." The name hit Derrick like a sledgehammer to the chest. Leah. Leah Chen, as she had been called when he knew her, though Wu must be her married name now. The woman who had shared his bed and his dreams for 3 years. The only person who had ever made him consider that there might be more to life than business success and financial achievement. The woman who had disappeared from his life 8 years ago without explanation, leaving behind only a brief note saying she couldn't be what he needed her to be. His hands began to tremble slightly, and he pressed them against his knees to hide the reaction. It couldn't be the same Leah, he told himself. It was a common enough name, and the world was full of coincidences that seemed meaningful, but ultimately proved to be nothing more than random chance. But even as he tried to rationalize the situation, he couldn't shake the growing certainty that this child sitting before him was somehow connected to the woman who had once been the center of his universe. "Elena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How old are you?" 6 3/4, she replied with the precision that only children applied to their ages. "My birthday was in January. Mommy made me a princess cake with pink frosting, and we went to the zoo to see the penguins because they're my favorite." January. Derrick's mind raced backward through time, calculating dates and possibilities with the same precision he applied to financial projections. If Elena was 6 3/4, she would have been born in January 7 years ago, which meant she would have been conceived in, his breath caught in his throat, April 8 years ago. The same month that Leah had suddenly become distant and withdrawn, claiming she needed space to think about their relationship. The same month she had disappeared from his life forever. "Elena," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion he couldn't quite identify. "Can you tell me what your mommy looks like?" Elena's face lit up with the joy that children displayed when given the chance to talk about their favorite subject. "She has long black hair that shines like a princess, and she's really pretty. She has a small scar on her chin from when she fell off her bike when she was little, and she has this tiny freckle right here." Elena pointed to a spot just below her left eye that she says is her beauty mark. Derrick's world tilted on its axis. The scar, the freckle, even the way Elena described her mother's hair, everything matched his memories of Leah Chen with perfect, devastating accuracy. But it couldn't be possible. Leah had left him, chosen to build a life without him, married someone else, and started a family. The idea that she had been carrying his child when she walked away was too painful to contemplate, too earth-shattering to accept. "Sir?" Robert the doorman had approached discreetly, his professional smile tinged with concern. "Is everything all right? The committee members are asking for you." Derrick looked up, momentarily disoriented by the return to present reality. The gala, his speech, the carefully planned evening, all of it seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the possibility that this little girl might be. No. He couldn't allow himself to think it. Not yet. Not until he was certain. "Elena," he said, turning back to the child, "I'm going to help you find your mother. But first, I need you to tell me something very important. Has your mommy ever mentioned a man named Derrick? Derrick Hale?" Elena's eyes grew wide, and her grip on the stuffed rabbit tightened. She looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure no one else was listening, then leaned closer to him. "Mommy says I'm not supposed to talk about him," she whispered conspiratorially. "She says it makes her too sad, but sometimes I hear her saying his name when she's crying at night. She thinks I don't know, but I do." The confession hit Derrick like a physical blow. All the air seemed to leave his lungs at once, and he had to place a hand on the ground to steady himself. For 8 years he had convinced himself that Leah had left because she had found someone better, someone who could give her the emotional connection he had never learned to provide. The possibility that she had been carrying his child, that she had raised their daughter alone while still thinking of him, was almost too much to process. "Elena," he said, his voice shaking with an emotion he couldn't name, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Has your mommy ever told you anything about your daddy?" Elena's face crumpled, and fresh tears began to spill down her cheeks. "Mommy says he was a good man who had to go away before I was born. She says he would have loved me very much if he could have stayed. But sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. She has a picture of him in her jewelry box, but she only looks at it when she thinks I'm not watching." Derrick felt his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Every rational thought, every logical explanation, every defense mechanism he had built over the years of business success and emotional isolation, all of it dissolved in the face of Elena's innocent revelation. The timeline matched perfectly. The physical resemblance was unmistakable. And now the confirmation that Leah still thought about him, still kept his picture, still told their daughter that he would have loved her. Their daughter. The phrase echoed in his mind like a prayer and a curse combined. Elena Wu was his daughter, the child he never knew existed, the family he had unknowingly lost when Leah walked away 8 years ago. "Elena," he whispered, reaching out to gently touch her cheek. "You look just like your mommy." "Everyone says that," Eleanor replied, leaning into his touch with a trust that broke his heart. "But Mommy says I have my daddy's eyes. She says they're the same color as chocolate, and that they get all crinkly when I smile, just like his did." The description was so perfectly accurate that Derrick felt tears threatening at the corners of his own eyes. He had been told countless times throughout his life that his eyes were his most distinctive feature, that they revealed emotions he tried to keep hidden behind his professional facade. To hear that Elena had inherited this trait, that Leah had noticed and remembered such a specific detail, felt like a key turning in a lock he hadn't even known existed. "Mr. Hale?" Robert's voice carried a note of urgency now. "Sir, they're really asking for you inside. The program is about to begin." Derrick looked up at the doorman, then back at Elena, torn between the obligation he had come here to fulfill and the earth-shattering discovery that was rewriting everything he thought he knew about his life. The gala, with its carefully choreographed speeches and strategic networking opportunities, suddenly seemed like a relic from another lifetime, a vestige of the man he had been before learning he was a father. "Robert," he said, his voice carrying a new authority born of desperate purpose, "I need you to call the event coordinator and tell them there's been an emergency. Have them reschedule my remarks for later in the evening, or better yet, have someone else deliver them. And I need you to help me find someone." "Of course, sir. What can I do?" "There's a woman inside named Elena Wu. She's attending the gala tonight. and she's missing her daughter. I need you to have her paged immediately, or better yet, have security locate her and bring her to the main entrance. Tell her Elena is safe and waiting for her outside." Robert nodded efficiently, though his professional expression couldn't quite hide his curiosity about the unusual situation. "Right away, Mr. Hale. Shall I have security escort you and the young lady to a private area while we locate her mother?" "No," Derrick said, surprising himself with the firmness of the response. "We'll wait right here. I'm not leaving Elena alone again." As Robert hurried inside to carry out his instructions, Derrick turned his full attention back to Elena. She had been watching the exchange with the solemn intensity that seemed to characterize everything about her, and he could see the intelligence behind her dark eyes, the same quick comprehension that had always impressed him about Leah. "Elena," he said gently, "your mommy is going to be here soon. But before she arrives, I want you to know that meeting you tonight has been the most important thing that's ever happened to me." Elena tilted her head to one side, studying his face with that unnervingly mature gaze. "Are you the man in Mommy's picture?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Derrick felt his throat close with emotion. "I think I might be," he whispered. Elena's face transformed with a radiant smile that lit up her entire features. Without warning, she launched herself forward and wrapped her small arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder with a trust and affection that stole his breath away. "I knew it," she whispered against his ear. "I knew you would come find me someday. Mommy said you had to go away, but I always hoped you would come back." Derrick's arms came up automatically to hold her, and he was amazed by how perfectly she fit against him, as if she had been designed specifically to fill an empty space in his heart that he hadn't even known existed. The scent of her hair, a mixture of children's shampoo and playground adventures, seemed to awaken every protective instinct he had never known he possessed. "I never went away, sweetheart," he murmured, using the endearment without conscious thought. "I just didn't know where to find you." They held each other in the glow of the hotel's elegant lighting, a billionaire CEO and the daughter he had never known existed, both of them crying now for different reasons. Derrick felt the walls he had built around his heart crumbling with each passing second, replaced by something warm and vast and terrifying in its intensity. The sound of high heels clicking rapidly across the cobblestones broke through their emotional reunion. Derrick looked up to see a woman approaching at almost a run, her long black hair streaming behind her like a banner. Even in the dim lighting, even after 8 years of separation, he would have recognized Leah Chen anywhere. She was still breathtakingly beautiful, though there were new lines around her eyes that spoke of years of struggle and sacrifice he had known nothing about. "Elena," Leah called out, her voice breaking with relief and panic in equal measure. "Elena, baby, where have you been? I've been looking everywhere for you." Elena pulled back from Derrick's embrace and turned toward her mother, but she didn't immediately run to her as he expected. Instead, she remained nestled against his side, one small hand resting on his chest as if to reassure herself that he was real. "Mommy," Elena said, her voice filled with an excitement that made her words tumble together. "Look who found me." "It's him, Mommy. It's the man from your picture." Leah stopped abruptly, her eyes moving from Elena to Derrick with a mixture of shock, recognition, and something that might have been terror. For a long moment, none of them moved or spoke, frozen in a tableau of past and present colliding with devastating force. "Hello, Leah," Derrick said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Derrick. His name on her lips sounded like a prayer and a curse, filled with 8 years of regret and longing and pain. How did you—" "Elena, come here right now." But Eleanor remained where she was, looking back and forth between her parents with the dawning understanding that something momentous was happening. "Mommy," she said carefully, "why didn't you tell me Daddy was so tall?" The word Daddy hung in the air between them like a challenge, forcing Leah to confront the truth she had been hiding for Elena's entire life. Derrick watched as a dozen emotions played across her beautiful features, love and guilt and fear and hope all warring for dominance. "Elena, sweetheart," Leah said, her voice carefully controlled, "why don't you go inside with the nice doorman and get some hot chocolate while Mommy while I talk to Mr. Hale?" "But I want to stay with Daddy," Elena protested, her grip on Derrick's hand tightening. "I just found him, and I don't want him to go away again." The simple statement hit both adults like a physical blow. Leah's composure finally cracked, and she covered her face with her hands as sobs began to shake her shoulders. Derrick felt his own tears threatening again as he realized the full scope of what Leah had endured, raising their daughter alone while carrying the weight of her decision to leave him. "Elena," he said gently, "your mommy and I need to have a grown-up conversation. But I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. Do you believe me?" Elena searched his face with those impossibly wise eyes, then nodded slowly. "You promise? Like a pinky promise?" "I promise." Derrick agreed solemnly, linking his pinky with hers in a gesture that felt more binding than any business contract he had ever signed. Robert appeared at that moment with a young woman from the hotel's guest services team. "Miss Elena," the woman said with a warm smile, "would you like to come see the beautiful fish in our lobby aquarium? We have some tropical ones that are simply magnificent." Elena looked questioningly at both her parents, then allowed herself to be led inside, though she kept looking back over her shoulder as if afraid they might disappear. Once she was out of earshot, Leah and Derrick were left alone with 8 years of silence and the devastating truth that lay between them. "She's mine, isn't she?" Derrick said, though it wasn't really a question. Leah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "Why?" The single word carried the weight of every sleepless night, every unanswered question, every moment of wondering what he had done wrong to drive away the only woman he had ever loved. "Because you would have married me out of Bach." "Obligation?" Leah whispered, finally finding her voice. "Because you would have given up everything you worked for, and eventually you would have resented both of us for trapping you in a life you never wanted." "That wasn't your choice to make," Derrick said, his voice rough with 8 years of suppressed anger and grief. "I was 24 years old and terrified," Leah replied, looking up at him with eyes that held depths of pain he was only beginning to understand. "I knew how much your company meant to you, how hard you had worked to build it from nothing. I knew you weren't ready for a family, maybe would never be ready. And I couldn't bear the thought of watching you sacrifice your dreams because of a mistake we made." "A mistake?" Derrick's voice rose slightly, causing several passing guests to glance in their direction. "Is that what Elena is to you?" "A mistake? No," Leah said fiercely, her own voice gaining strength. "Elena is the best thing that ever happened to me. She's brilliant and funny and kind, and she has your stubborn determination and your way of seeing straight to the heart of every problem. She's the most amazing person I've ever known, and I would make the same choice again if it meant protecting her from growing up with parents who resented each other." "You think I would have resented her?" Derrick asked, incredulous. "Leah, I've known her for 20 minutes, and I already love her more than I thought was possible. How could you think I wouldn't want my own daughter?" "Because you told me," Leah said quietly. "The night before I found out I was pregnant, you told me that having children was the last thing on your mind, that you couldn't imagine anything more disruptive to your 5-year plan. You said people who had kids in their 20s were either desperate or delusional, and that you intended to wait until you were at least 40 before even considering it." The memory hit Derrick like a slap. He did remember that conversation, sparked by news that one of their friends had announced an unexpected pregnancy. He had been thoughtless and cruel in his assessment, speaking from the arrogance of youth and the single-minded focus that had driven his early business success. But he had never imagined that Leah was sitting beside him, carrying his child and absorbing every careless word as a judgment on their future together. "I was an idiot," he said simply. "I was 26 years old and thought I had all the answers. If I had known, if you had told me, you would have done the right thing," Leah finished for him. "You would have proposed and married me and tried to make it work because that's the kind of man you are. But Derrick, I didn't want you to marry me because it was the right thing. I wanted you to marry me because you couldn't imagine living without me." The truth of her words cut deeper than any business failure or professional setback ever had. Because she was right, he realized with devastating clarity. If she had told him about the pregnancy, he would have proposed immediately, would have rearranged his entire life to accommodate their unexpected family. But it would have been duty driving his actions, not desire, and eventually, that distinction would have poisoned everything between them. "So, you decided to make the choice for both of us," he said, not accusingly but with a kind of wondering sadness. "I decided to set you free to become the man you were meant to be," Leah replied, "and to give Elena a mother who chose her completely, without reservation or regret." They stood in silence for several minutes, watching the elegant guests continue to arrive for the gala that suddenly seemed like a relic from another lifetime. Derrick found himself studying Leah's profile, noting the changes that 8 years had brought to her face. She was still beautiful, perhaps more so now that her features had gained the depth that only comes from surviving real hardship. But there were lines of exhaustion around her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that spoke of years of carrying burdens alone. "Have you been happy?" he asked finally. Leah considered the question seriously before answering. "I've been fulfilled," she said. "Elena gives my life meaning in ways I never expected. But happy, honestly happy? Not since I left you." "Why are you here tonight?" Derrick asked. "At the gala, I mean. It can't be a coincidence." A rueful smile crossed Leah's features. "I'm a graphic designer now, freelance mostly so I can work around Elena's schedule. The foundation hired me to create the materials for tonight's event, the programs, the auction catalog, all of it. They gave me 2 tickets as part of my compensation, and I thought, why not? Elena had never been to anything so fancy, and I thought she might enjoy seeing how the other half lives." "You brought her inside?" "For a little while. She was fascinated by everything, the chandeliers, the fancy dresses, the way everyone talked in these polite, quiet voices. But then she needed the restroom, and I was in the middle of a conversation with the client about some last-minute changes to the auction items. I asked her to wait right outside the bathroom door, but you know how 6-year-olds are. She must have wandered off and gotten lost." "She was terrified," Derrick said, remembering the tears streaming down Elena's face when he first saw her. "I know," Leah whispered, fresh tears threatening. "I've been frantic for the past hour, searching everywhere. The security guards were helping, but this place is so big, and there are so many people. When that man came and told me she was outside with you, I thought I was going to collapse from relief." They were interrupted by the sound of the hotel's glass doors opening. Elena emerged with her escort, clutching a steaming cup of hot chocolate topped with an elaborate swirl of whipped cream. Her face was bright with excitement, and she practically skipped across the cobblestones to rejoin her parents. "Mommy, Daddy, you should see the fish!" she exclaimed, apparently having settled the question of Derrick's parental status in her own mind. "There's one that's bright blue and yellow, and another one that looks like it's wearing a striped sweater. And the lady said they have names for all of them, and some of them are older than me." The casual way she included both of them in her address, as if they were already a complete family unit, made both adults exchange a look of wonder and terror. Elena seemed blissfully unaware of the complexity of the situation, operating instead from the simple logic of childhood that said, if two people loved her, they must logically love each other as well. "Elena, sweetheart," Leah said carefully, "we need to talk about some things. About Daddy and me, and why we haven't all been together before now." "I know," Elena said matter-of-factly. "Daddy had to work very hard to become successful, and you were taking care of me. But now he's found us, so we can all be together like a real family." The innocent confidence in her voice broke both of their hearts. Derrick knelt down to Elena's level, searching for words to explain a situation that he barely understood himself. "Elena," he said gently, "families are complicated sometimes. Your mommy and I haven't seen each other for a very long time, and there are things we need to figure out together. It might take some time before we know what's going to happen next." Elena's face fell, and for a moment she looked much younger than her 6¾ years. "But you're not going to leave again, are you? You promised." "I'm not going anywhere," Derrick assured her, reaching out to take her small hand in his. "But your mommy and I need to have some grown-up conversations about how we're going to make this work. There are legal things to consider, and practical things, and we want to make sure we do everything the right way so that you feel safe and loved no matter what happens." End quote. "What kind of legal things?" Elena asked with the persistent curiosity that characterized all her questions. Derrick looked helplessly at Leah, realizing that he had no idea how to explain concepts like paternity tests and custody arrangements to a 6-year-old. Leah stepped in smoothly, the result of years of experience navigating difficult conversations with their daughter. "Remember how we talked about how some things are for grown-ups to worry about, and your job is just to be a kid and let us handle the complicated stuff?" Leah said. Elena nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "This is one of those times. Daddy and I need to work out some grown-up details, but that doesn't change how much we both love you or how important you are to both of us." "Okay," Elena said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "But can we all have dinner together soon? Like a real family?" The hope in her voice was almost unbearable. Derrick found himself making a promise before he could think through the implications. "Yes," he said. "We'll have dinner together very soon." "Tomorrow?" Elena pressed. "Maybe not tomorrow," Leah interjected gently. "But soon. We promise." Robert reappeared at that moment, his professional discretion intact despite the unprecedented nature of the situation he had witnessed. "Mr. Hale," he said quietly, "the committee members are asking if you'll be able to deliver your remarks tonight. I've been telling them you're dealing with a family emergency, but they're hoping to know one way or another so they can adjust the program accordingly." Derrick looked back toward the hotel's glittering interior, where hundreds of wealthy philanthropists were gathered to write checks and congratulate themselves on their charitable contributions. 3 hours ago, that world had represented everything he valued: success, influence, the respect of his peers, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful from nothing. Now it seemed hollow and insignificant compared to the small hand tucked trustingly in his own. "Tell them I won't be speaking tonight," he said without hesitation. "In fact, tell them I won't be attending at all. Something much more important has come up." "Of course, sir. Shall I have your driver brought around?" "Yes, thank you." Derrick turned back to Leah and Elena, his mind already racing through the practical considerations of their situation. "Leah, we need to talk, really talk. Not here, not with Elena listening to every word, but somewhere private where we can figure out what happens next." Leah nodded, though he could see the apprehension in her eyes. "My apartment isn't far from here. Elena should probably get to bed soon anyway. It's past her usual bedtime." "I'm not tired," Elena protested predictably, though the way she rubbed her eyes suggested otherwise. "I know you're not, sweetheart," Leah said with the practiced patience of a single mother. "But tomorrow is a school day, and you need your rest. Can Daddy come with us?" Elena asked hopefully. Leah and Derrick exchanged another loaded glance. The situation was moving faster than either of them had anticipated, driven by Elena's innocent assumptions and their own desperate need to understand what had happened to their lives. "I think that would be a good idea," Derrick said carefully. "If your mommy doesn't mind." "I don't mind," Leah replied, though her voice carried undertones of nervousness that only someone who had once known her intimately would recognize. "But Derrick, I should warn you, we don't live the way you're probably used to. It's a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, nothing fancy." "I don't care where you live," Derrick said with surprising intensity. "I care that you're both safe and happy." The ride to Leah's apartment passed in relative silence, with Elena chattering excitedly about the evening's events, while the adults remained lost in their own thoughts. Derrick's driver, Marcus, had raised an eyebrow at the unexpected passengers, but maintained his professional discretion as they navigated through increasingly modest neighborhoods. Leah's apartment building was a converted Victorian house that had been divided into 4 units, with peeling paint and a front porch that listed slightly to one side. But the small garden was well tended, and warm light spilled from several windows, giving the building a welcoming quality that Derrick's sterile penthouse had never possessed. "This is it," Leah said unnecessarily as Marcus pulled up to the curb. "Home sweet home." Derrick climbed out of the Mercedes and looked around the quiet residential street with genuine curiosity. Children's bicycles were scattered on front lawns, and he could hear the distant sound of a television playing through an open window. It was a world completely removed from his usual environment of glass towers and exclusive restaurants, but there was something appealing about its obvious sense of community. Elena had already bounded up the front steps and was fumbling with a set of keys that seemed almost too large for her small hands. "I can unlock the door all by myself," she announced proudly. "Mommy taught me in case of emergencies." "That's very responsible," Derrick said, genuinely impressed by the independence Leah had fostered in their daughter. "Elena is extremely capable for her age," Leah said, though there was a note of sadness in her voice that suggested this independence had been born of necessity rather than choice. "She's had to be." The interior of the apartment was small but immaculately clean, decorated with a combination of second-hand furniture and Elena's artwork. The walls were covered with finger paintings and crayon drawings, most featuring stick figure families under smiling suns. Derrick found himself studying them with fascination, trying to decode the stories Elena had told herself about family life. "Can I show Daddy my room?" Elena asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "After you get ready for bed," Leah said firmly. "Pajamas, teeth brushed, and then 5 minutes to show off your treasures before lights out." Elena sighed dramatically but complied, heading toward what Derrick assumed was the bathroom, with the resigned air of a child who knew when her mother meant business. Once they were alone, the apartment felt smaller and more intimate. Derrick found himself standing awkwardly in the middle of the living room, unsure of the protocol for this unprecedented situation. How did one behave when discovering they had a child with their former lover? What were the appropriate boundaries, the proper procedures? "Would you like some coffee?" Leah asked, moving toward the small kitchen that was separated from the living area by a breakfast bar. "I'm afraid I don't have anything stronger." "Coffee would be fine," Derrick replied, though he wasn't sure his nerves could handle any additional stimulation. As Leah busied herself with the coffee maker, Derrick continued his examination of Elena's artwork. One drawing in particular caught his attention, a crayon portrait of 2 figures labeled Mommy and Elena in careful block letters. But there was a third figure drawn in lighter strokes, almost ghost-like, standing apart from the other 2. "She draws him sometimes," Leah said quietly, having noticed the direction of his gaze. "Her invisible daddy. She's been doing it since she was old enough to hold a crayon." "You never told her anything about me specifically?" "I told her that her father was a good man who couldn't be with us, but that he would have loved her very much if he could have stayed. I showed her a picture of you once. When she was about 4 and going through a phase of asking endless questions about why other kids had daddies and she didn't. "You kept a picture of me?" Leah's cheeks flushed slightly. "Just one. From that weekend we spent at the lake, remember? You were laughing at something, and the light was hitting your face just right. You looked so happy, so completely relaxed. It was how I wanted to remember you." Derrick did remember that weekend. It had been one of the few times in their relationship when he had completely disconnected from work, when he had allowed himself to simply exist in the moment with Leah. They had rented a small cabin, spent their days hiking and their evenings talking by the fire. It had been perfect, and he had been planning to suggest they make it an annual tradition when Leah disappeared from his life 3 weeks later. "I looked for you," he said suddenly. "After you left, I hired a private investigator, checked with all your friends, even contacted your family, but it was like you had vanished completely." "I worked very hard to disappear," Leah admitted. "I moved across the country, changed my name to my grandmother's maiden name, paid cash for everything so there wouldn't be a paper trail. I was terrified that you would find me and try to convince me to come back. And now?" Leah was quiet for a long moment, concentrating on measuring coffee grounds with unnecessary precision. "Now I'm terrified that you won't want to stay," she said finally. The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest in a way that reminded Derrick of why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. Leah had never been one to hide behind social niceties or protective facades. She said what she meant, felt what she felt, and trusted others to handle her honesty with care. "Leah," he said, moving closer to the kitchen counter, "I need you to understand something. In the 8 years since you left, I've built a company worth over $50 million. I've been featured on the covers of business magazines, given speeches to rooms full of influential people, had politicians and celebrities compete for my attention. But none of it has meant as much to me as the 20 minutes I spent tonight with Elena." End quote. Leah's hands stilled on the coffee maker, and he could see her struggling with emotions she had kept carefully controlled for years. "I don't expect you to forgive me for leaving," she said without turning around. "I know it was selfish and cowardly, and I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand that every choice I made was about protecting Elena, about making sure she grew up feeling wanted and valued rather than resented." "I could never resent her," Derrick said fiercely. "She's extraordinary, Leah. She's funny and intelligent and brave, and she has this way of looking at the world that makes me remember what it felt like to believe in magic. How could I resent someone who gave me the greatest gift I've ever received? Because she's going to complicate your life in ways you can't imagine," Leah replied, finally turning to face him. 6-year-olds don't care about business schedules or important meetings. They get sick at inconvenient times. They have emotional meltdowns in public places. They need constant attention and reassurance and love. Your entire world is going to have to change if you want to be a real father to her, not just a weekend visitor who shows up with expensive presents." "Then I'll change it," Derrick said without hesitation. "I'll change everything if that's what it takes. You say that now, but I'm not the same man I was 8 years ago, Leah. Yes, I was obsessed with building my company, with proving that I could succeed on my own terms. But I achieved those goals years ago. The business practically runs itself now. And I have people I trust to handle the day-to-day operations. I've been looking for something more meaningful to do with my life, something that matters beyond profit margins and market share. Elena could be that something." Before Leah could respond, Elena appeared in the doorway wearing purple pajamas decorated with unicorns. Her hair was damp from washing, and she clutched her worn stuffed rabbit against her chest. "I'm ready for my room tour," she announced. "And I brushed my teeth extra good so Daddy could see." Derrick found himself grinning at her enthusiasm. "Let's see those pearly whites," he said. and Elena obligingly showed off her small, even teeth. "Very impressive," he pronounced solemnly. "I think those might be the cleanest teeth I've ever seen." Elena giggled and grabbed his hand, tugging him toward a short hallway. "Come on, you have to see my book collection. I can read chapter books now, all by myself." Elena's room was tiny, but cheerfully decorated in shades of pink and purple. The walls were covered with more of her artwork, along with a few store-bought posters of unicorns and rainbows. But what dominated the space was an enormous bookshelf, clearly too large for the room, packed with volumes that ranged from picture books to early chapter books to what looked like several young adult novels. "Wow," Derrick said, genuinely impressed. "This is quite a library." "Mommy says books are the most important thing we can spend money on," Elena said proudly. "We go to the used bookstore every Saturday, and I get to pick out 3 new ones if I've been good all week." "What's your favorite?" Derrick asked, crouching down to examine the titles. Elena considered the question seriously. "Right now it's this one," she said, pulling out a worn copy of A Wrinkle in Time. "It's about a girl who goes on adventures through space and time to save her daddy. Mommy says it might be a little advanced for me, but I like the hard words. They make me feel smart." Derrick felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That's one of my favorite books, too," he said truthfully. "I read it when I was about your age." "Really?" Elena's eyes lit up with delight. "What was your favorite part?" "The part where Meg realizes that her differences, the things she thought made her weird or difficult, were actually her greatest strengths. That it was okay to be different as long as she was true to Bao, herself." Elena nodded seriously. "That's my favorite part too. Sometimes I feel different from the other kids at school because I don't have a daddy to come to the father-daughter events. But now I do have a daddy, so maybe I won't feel so different anymore." The simple statement hit Derrick like a physical blow. He had never considered how his absence might have affected Elena's sense of belonging, how she might have felt incomplete or different because of the choices that had been made before her birth. "Elena," he said carefully, "I want you to know that having a daddy doesn't make you more or less special than any other kid. You were already perfect exactly as you were. But I'm very glad I get to be your daddy, and I hope we can make up for lost time. Can you read me a story?" Elena asked hopefully. "Mommy usually reads to me, but maybe tonight you could do it?" Derrick looked questioningly at Leah, who had appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. She nodded encouragingly, though he could see the emotion shimmering in her eyes. "I would love to read you a story," Derrick said. "What would you like to hear?" Elena selected a picture book about a little girl who befriends a dragon, and Derrick found himself settling into the small chair beside her bed while she snuggled under her covers. The experience of reading to his daughter, of watching her eyes grow heavy as his voice wove the familiar story, felt more natural and right than anything he had ever done in a boardroom. When Elena finally drifted off to sleep, Derrick remained sitting beside her for several minutes, studying her peaceful face and marveling at the perfect curve of her cheek, the way her dark lashes fanned against her skin. She was so small, so trusting, so completely dependent on the adults in her life to protect and nurture her. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. Leah was waiting for him in the living room, curled up on the small sofa with her cup of coffee cradled in her hands. She had changed out of her gala dress into jeans and a soft sweater, and the transformation made her look younger, more like the woman he remembered from 8 years ago. "She's asleep," he reported, settling into the chair across from her. "She likes you," Leah observed. "I wasn't sure how she would react to meeting you. She's usually shy around new people." "I don't feel new to her," Derrick said thoughtfully. "It's strange, but from the moment she spoke to me outside the hotel, I felt like I'd been waiting my whole life to meet her. Does that sound crazy? Not crazy at all. I felt the same way the first time I held her. Like she had always been part of me, even before I knew she existed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Derrick found himself studying Leah's profile, noting the way she had changed and the way she had remained exactly the same. She was still beautiful, still carried herself with that particular combination of strength and vulnerability that had first attracted him. But there was a new maturity about her, a depth that came from years of making difficult decisions and living with their consequences. What happens now? Leah asked finally. I don't know, Derrick admitted. This isn't exactly a situation they prepare you for in business school. But I know I want to be part of Elena's life, really part of it, not just an occasional visitor or a source of financial support. What about your company, your 5-year plans and growth projections? They'll have to adapt. I have good people working for me, people I trust to handle things when I need to focus on other priorities. And Elena is definitely going to be a priority. Leah nodded slowly, though he could see the worry lines around her eyes. Derrick, I need you to be sure about this. Elena has already been through the disappointment of not having a father. If you decide 6 months from now that parenthood is too disruptive or demanding, if you realize you're not cut out for this, it will destroy her. I'm not going anywhere, Derrick said firmly. But Leah, I need you to be honest with me about something. Why didn't you ever ask for help? Child support, medical expenses, anything? Elena is my daughter too, and you've been carrying this burden alone for 7 years. Leah set down her coffee cup and wrapped her arms around her knees, a defensive posture he remembered from their arguments years ago. Because I didn't want your money, she said quietly. I didn't want Elena to grow up wondering if her father only cared about her because he was legally obligated to. I wanted to prove to myself that I could provide for her on my own, that I could be enough for both of Val. U.S. And have you been? Enough for both of you? Most of the time, Leah replied honestly. But there have been moments, especially when she was younger and I was working 3 jobs just to pay rent, when I wondered if I had made the right choice. When she got pneumonia at age 4 and I spent 3 days in the hospital with her, terrified and exhausted and completely alone. I thought about calling you, but then I remembered how you used to work 18-hour days, how you would forget to eat when you were focused on a project, and I couldn't imagine you dropping everything to sit in a pediatric ND ward. You should have called, Derrick said, his voice rough with emotion. Regardless of everything else, regardless of our history or my supposed inability to prioritize properly, you should have called. She's my daughter, Leah. I had a right to know she was sick, and she had a right to have both her basta parents with her. I know that now, Leah whispered. But I was 24 and scared and trying to make the best decisions I could with the information I had. I thought I was protecting both of you from a situation that would make everyone miserable. What about now? Are you still trying to protect us from each other? Leah looked up at him with eyes that held 8 years of loneliness and regret. Now I'm trying to figure out if there's any way to undo the damage I've done, if there's any possibility of building something good from the mess I've made of all our lives. We're all still here, Derrick pointed out. Elena is healthy and happy and brilliant. You've built a career and raised an amazing daughter, and I've learned that success means nothing without people to share it with. Maybe the timing wasn't ideal, but we're in a position now to make choices based on what we want rather than what we're afraid of." End quote. "What do you want?" Leah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities and fraught with danger. Derrick knew that his answer would set the tone for everything that came after, that there would be no taking back whatever truth he chose to share. "I want to be Elena's father," he said finally. "I want to take her to school and help her with homework and teach her to drive when she's old enough. I want to be the person she calls when she's scared or excited or confused about something. I want to make up for 7 years of bedtime stories and birthday parties and scraped knees that I wasn't here to kiss better. And what about us? Leah asked. What about you and me? Derrick was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. I don't know, he said honestly. 8 years ago, I thought you were the love of my life. When you left, I convinced myself that I was better off alone, that relationships were just distractions from more important goals. But seeing you tonight, seeing how you've raised Elena, seeing the woman you've become, I realize I never stopped loving you. I just buried those feelings so deep that I forgot they were there. Leah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I never stopped loving you either, she admitted. But love isn't always enough, is it? We're different people now, with different priorities and different lives. Elena has to come first for both of us, and I won't let her get caught in the middle of whatever this is between us. So, where does that leave us? Taking it slow, Leah said firmly. Getting to know each other again, figuring out how to co-parent effectively, and seeing if there's any foundation left to build on. Elena needs stability and security, not two adults who rush into something we're not ready for just because we have a child together. Derrick nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution even as part of him wanted to argue that they had already wasted enough time. I can live with slow, he said, but I want to be clear about something. This isn't just about Elena for me. Yes, she's the most important thing now, and her well-being will always come first. But I want a chance to find out if we can build something real together, all three of us. I want that too, Leah whispered, more than I probably should. They talked until nearly 2 in the morning, sharing 8 years of experiences and emotions, filling in the gaps that had been left by their separation. Derrick learned about Elena's first words, which had been, book, her first steps taken while chasing a neighbor's cat, and her ongoing obsession with marine biology sparked by a documentary about octopi. Leah learned about his company's evolution from a small software firm to a major player in the tech industry, his gray, philanthropic work with education nonprofits, and his growing sense that professional success felt hollow without personal connections to give it meaning. When Derrick finally called for his driver to take him home, they had established the framework for moving forward. He would undergo a paternity test, not because either of them doubted Elena's parentage, but because legal documentation would be necessary for things like medical decisions and school records. They would tell Elena the truth about their relationship, but in age-appropriate terms that emphasized their commitment to her rather than the complications of their romantic history. And they would take things one day at a time, building trust and understanding as they figured out how to become a family. Over the following weeks, Derrick's life transformed in ways he had never anticipated. He rearranged his work schedule to accommodate school pickups and playground visits, discovered the peculiar joy of having small sticky handprints on his expensive suits, and learned that a 6-year-old's questions could be far more challenging than any business negotiation. Elena adapted to having a Pueda father with the resilience that seemed to characterize everything about her. She introduced him to her teachers with obvious pride, included him in her elaborate imaginary games, and began planning elaborate weekend adventures that inevitably involved some combination of books, playgrounds, and ice cream. Derrick found himself looking forward to these simple outings more than he had ever anticipated the most important business meetings. The paternity test results, when they arrived, surprised no one but provided the legal foundation they needed to move forward. Derrick immediately began the process of adding Elena to his health insurance, updating his will to include provisions for her education and future security, and investigating the best private schools in the area. But when he suggested transferring Elena to a more prestigious institution, both Leah and Elena herself objected. I like my school, Elena said firmly. My friends are there, and Mrs. Peterson is the best teacher in the whole world. She lets me help her grade the easy papers, and she says I'm reading at a high school level. Elena's right, Leah added. She's thriving where she is, and I don't want to disrupt her social connections just because we can afford something more expensive now. It was one of many small lessons Derrick learned about the difference between providing for a child and actually parenting one. Elena didn't need designer clothes or exclusive experiences. She needed consistency, attention, and the security of knowing that the adults in her life were committed to her well-being above all else. As autumn progressed into winter, the three of them settled into a routine that felt increasingly natural. Derrick would arrive at the apartment each morning to walk Elena to school, a 20-minute journey that had become his favorite part of each day. Elena would chatter about her plans for the day, point out interesting dogs or unusual cloud formations, and occasionally slip her small hand into his with a trust that still took his breath away. Evenings were spent helping with homework, preparing simple dinners together, and establishing bedtime rituals that included stories, conversations about the day's events, and Elena's growing collection of questions about everything from quantum physics to why people fell in love. Derrick discovered that he enjoyed these quiet domestic moments more than the high-stakes negotiations and strategic planning sessions that had once defined his sense of purpose. His relationship with Leah evolved more slowly, but with a depth that had been missing from their younger romance. They were both more mature now, more aware of their own needs and limitations, more capable of communicating honestly about difficult topics. They talked through their different parenting philosophies, coordinated their schedules to ensure Elena always had adequate supervision, and slowly began to rebuild the emotional intimacy that had once connected them. The first time Derrick stayed overnight at the apartment, it was because Elena had come down with a stomach virus, and both parents wanted to be available if she needed them. They spent the night taking turns checking her temperature, bringing her sips of water, and reassuring her that she would feel better soon. When morning came and Elena's fever had broken, Derrick realized that he had never felt more useful or needed than he had during those hours of simple caregiving. "Thank you," Leah said quietly as they shared coffee in the kitchen while Elena slept peacefully in her room. "For what?" "For being here. For not treating this like an inconvenience or an interruption to your real life. For just being a dad. This is my real life now." Derrick replied and was surprised to realize how completely he meant it. By Christmas, they had told Elena the full story of how her parents had known each other before her birth, how they had been separated by misunderstandings, and fear, and how her arrival in both their lives had given them a chance to build something better than what they had lost. Elena absorbed the information with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood, more interested in the promise of future family traditions than in dwelling on the complications of the past. "So we're going to be together now?" she asked. "Like a real family?" "We already are a real family," Leah assured her. "Families come in all different shapes and sizes, and what makes them real is love and commitment, not necessarily living in the same house or having the same last name." "But you and Daddy love each other too, right?" "Not just me." The question came during their Christmas Eve dinner, catching both adults off guard with its directness. Elena had a gift for asking the questions that got straight to the heart of every situation, and this was no exception. Derrick and Leah exchanged a look across the small dining table, both of them aware that their answer would shape Elena's understanding of her family's future. "Yes," Leah said finally, "we do love each other. But grown-up love is complicated sometimes, and we're still figuring out what that means for all of us." "It means we're taking our time to make sure we do everything right," Derrick added, "because you're the most important thing to both of us, and we want to make choices that are good for you." Elena considered this seriously, then nodded. "That's probably smart," she said. Mrs. Peterson says the best decisions are usually the ones you think about carefully first. On New Year's Eve, as Elena slept peacefully in her room and the city celebrated outside their windows, Derrick and Leah finally had the conversation they had been building toward for months. "I want us to try again," Derrick said, taking Leah's hand as they sat together on the small sofa. "Not just as co-parents, but as partners. I want to build a life together, all three of us." "Are you sure?" Leah asked. "Really sure? Because Elena is attached to you now, and if this doesn't work out, it's going to work out," Derrick interrupted gently. "I know that sounds naive, but I'm not the same person I was 8 years ago. I know what matters now, and I know what I'm willing to sacrifice to protect it. You and Elena are my priority. Everything else is just details." "What about your company? Your career ambitions?" "The company will be fine. I've been transitioning more responsibilities to my management team anyway, focusing on long-term strategy rather than day-to-day operations. As for career ambitions, I've achieved everything I thought I wanted when I was 26. Now I want something different. I want to coach Elena's soccer team and help her with science, fair projects, and take family vacations to places she's read about in books. I want to grow old with you and see what kind of amazing woman our daughter becomes." Leah was quiet for a long time, studying his face as if trying to read the truth behind his words. "If we do this," she said finally, "if we really try to build something together, it has to be because it's what we both want, not just what would be convenient or practical for Elena's sake." "I want it," Derrick said, without hesitation. "I want you. I want our family. I want the chance to love you both the way you deserve to be loved. I want to wake up every morning knowing that my most important job is being Elena's father and your partner." "I want it too," Leah whispered, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a very long journey. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in the apartment building's garden, with Elena serving as the maid of honor and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself. The guest list was small, including only their closest friends and the neighbors who had become Elena's extended family over the years of their residence. Elena's joy was infectious, her excitement about officially becoming a real family evident in every smile and giggle throughout the day. She had helped plan every detail of the celebration, from the music playlist to the menu, ensuring that the event reflected all three of their personalities and preferences. As they exchanged vows, Derrick found himself thinking about the night outside the hotel when a crying little girl had whispered words that changed everything. Elena had been looking for her mother that evening, but in a way, she had been looking for all of them, the family they were meant to be. "You look like my daddy," she had said, and in that moment of recognition, she had given him the greatest gift of his life, the chance to become the man he was meant to be, the father she deserved, and the partner Leah had always needed. In the years that followed, Derrick often reflected on how a single moment of compassion, a decision to stop and listen to a child in distress, had rewritten the entire trajectory of his life. Elena grew into a confident, curious teenager who excelled in her studies and never doubted that she was loved and valued by both her parents. Leah flourished as both a mother and a wife, building a successful graphic design business while maintaining the fierce independence that had always been part of her charm. And Derrick discovered that the greatest success of his life had nothing to do with profit margins or market share, but everything to do with the sound of his daughter's laughter, the warmth of his wife's hand in his, and the knowledge that he had chosen love over ambition when it mattered most. The little girl who had once cried alone outside a fancy hotel had given him everything that mattered, and in return, he had given her the father she had always dreamed of having. It was, he realized, the most profitable investment he had ever made.